For the first time in history, Americans are gaining access to the truth about China and the events of the past week. The potential ban of TikTok and the rise of RedNote, a Chinese social media platform, have completely reshaped the future of US-China relations. Before this week, most Americans had never truly understood what life in China is like. But now, as the digital Berlin Wall has fallen, millions of Americans are finally discovering that life in China is very different from the dystopian image that is often portrayed in Western media. I truly believe that banning TikTok was a massive mistake for the United States. Now that we're all on RedNote, we're learning a lot of things that contradict the negative portrayals of China. For instance, we're realizing that China has universal healthcare, and you don't have to pay for an ambulance ride. They also have amazing cars at incredibly low prices, and Huawei phones, which are better than iPhones, are banned in the US. We're seeing that you can walk outside at night without fear, and there are no mass school shootings. Someone even commented on my RedNote saying, "Now that you're here, I hope you can see that we're not the beasts that your media makes us out to be." I replied, "We never thought of you as that way." Sure, no country is perfect, and every place has its issues, but it's fascinating how much we're learning, often more than we were supposed to. Millions of Americans now know the truth, and they're starting to question the narrative that China is the enemy. This shift in perception is making ripples throughout American society. Duolingo, the largest language learning platform, saw a 7% increase in shares after the ban of TikTok, and interest in learning Mandarin has risen by over 216%. Now that so many Americans are seeing the truth, they're asking questions that politicians can't easily answer, like, why is China my enemy? I have more in common with the average Chinese worker than I do with a billionaire in America. A tweet asking this question garnered over 7.6 million views, and it's easy to understand why. Just look at the image from Donald Trump's inauguration, with the world's wealthiest billionaires on stage. The combined net worth of the individuals in that photo was over $1.3 trillion. Despite the immense power these executives hold over the American public, the truth about China has now been exposed. What's incredible is that China didn't even have to do anything to make this shift happen. Everything happened organically, set in motion by the actions of the US government. As Sean Ryan, an American who has lived in China for over 25 years, put it, Americans are finding out that China is better than they imagined, and the Chinese are finding out that America is worse than they imagined. In this video, we'll dive into the truth about the TikTok ban, explain how the RedNote movement ties into the broader US-China relationship, and reveal how this whole situation is contributing to the growing erosion of trust in the US. To understand why TikTok was targeted, we first need to explore why the US government went after it in the first place. One of America's greatest strengths has been its dominance over big tech and social media, creating a global monopoly on online services and digital communication. Whether in India, Brazil, or Europe, people rely heavily on American platforms like Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp for social networking, while platforms like Twitter and Google shape news and access to information. The US has built an extensive monopoly not just on web services but on the platforms through which the world connects and consumes information. But as we've seen in recent years, these American tech companies are not unbiased platforms that support free speech. The reality is, they work closely with the Pentagon and State Department to push narratives that align with the US government's goals. Almost no country has true control over its own internet landscape, except China. China stands out because it has created its own tech ecosystem, entirely insulated from foreign interference. This leads us to TikTok, the one major app in the US that isn't under American control. It's not only the most popular app among Gen Z and millennials, but also a space where Americans can access news and information without the heavy filter of US tech giants or government interests. The ban has been framed as a national security threat, but let's be real, there are no credible security concerns related to TikTok's Chinese ownership. The app stores all US citizens' data outside of China, on Oracle servers based in Texas, and has complied with every US government request. The real concern is that TikTok allows Americans to access information and share opinions that challenge the US government's preferred narratives. A perfect example of this is the situation in Gaza. While journalists and Palestinian voices were being silenced on platforms like Meta, young people on TikTok were able to document the conflict and provide historical context, presenting a viewpoint that wasn't controlled by the US government's narrative. Time magazine even exposed this truth about TikTok's censorship refusal. Hashtags like #FreePalestine were used more than 82 million times, while #IStandWithIsrael only appeared 2 million times. The truth is that the Israeli lobby holds significant power over the US Congress, and the pressure to censor certain viewpoints has been immense. This leads to a broader realization that the US government wasn't worried about China's national security threat. It was afraid of what American citizens were learning. The government was worried about Americans discovering new perspectives and alternatives that it had deliberately kept hidden. The memes and discussions now circulating among Americans reflect this shift in understanding, with many now realizing that everything they were told about China was a lie. Meanwhile, Chinese people are learning more about America and realizing the truth there too. They once saw America as the epitome of freedom and opportunity, but over time, with more Chinese students returning home after studying in the US and witnessing the rapid progress in China compared to the stagnation in America, this narrative has started to crack. Now, with more Americans discovering the realities of their own country, the contrast is becoming clearer. The very things Chinese people once admired about America, freedom, opportunity, safety, are increasingly found to be more achievable in their own country. Chinese people are now appreciating the progress their government has made, including high-speed rail, affordable healthcare, and low living costs. They're no longer idolizing the Western system, which has clearly failed many in the US. The cost of living in China is so much more affordable. People are living in well-built apartments for a fraction of what it costs in the US. In addition, the absence of an annual real estate tax in China makes home ownership much more accessible. China has achieved this level of progress by using government funding and policies to steer investments in ways that align with the country's actual needs. This is in contrast to the US, where investments often serve the interests of the wealthy without necessarily benefiting the broader population. The result is a growing divide between the US's wealthiest citizens and the rest of society, with Americans becoming increasingly frustrated with their country's lack of progress. And the contrast doesn't end there. Chinese grocery stores are much more affordable than American ones, with items like sausages and fruits costing a fraction of what they do in the US. As more Americans discover these truths, they're realizing that China's development isn't just a story of economic growth. It's a story of achieving impressive progress with much lower income levels than the US, which is a major point of contention for many Americans grappling with rising income inequality. As more Americans learn about these truths, they're beginning to see just how much China has achieved with far fewer resources than the US. And for many, this has led to a realization that their own country's problems, including inequality and stagnation, need urgent attention. This shift in perspective is changing how Americans view China and their own country, and it may well have lasting effects on how the world views global power dynamics in the years to come. If you enjoyed this type of content, please do well to subscribe and like the video.